They're both sleeping.
Sleeping.
Yeah.
Grouping them out.
idea.
Judith is also tired.
Go all the way
They're
back.
sleeping.
Jen?
Jen, walk all the way back.
Robin just said that she was sleeping.
Neither one of them slept very well, so they're both taking naps.
Thank you.
So they've gone back to the
I'm
farmhouse.
already into it. Yes, Jane has, yes.
It's such an exciting thing to be doing.
Yeah,
But
but
not
not
on your
occupied,
rest, can it? This is I've been trying to practice vases a bit, but not often enough.
Okay.
I told Graham she's there.
But I will
And I also told her to Judith tomorrow.
Favorite tulips.
That'll be only a spring-based flower, I suppose. I'm going to do a demonstration actually. You can
Is that come through? Is that broken on
Yeah, probably. These tubes getting a little bit of a battering. I've got a bit of a cleaner for it. All right, folks, if you want to come up, pull up a chair, come and get a nice little view, if you want to, come over and so. Yeah.
You just want to manage the stroke, Peter.
Probably.
We're not bringing a notepad, are we?
Well, I might say something useful. I might not. I probably won't. But who knows? Who knows what gobbledygook I'll conjure up this time? So I don't get on camera.
Oh,
Oh.
I'm sorry. May I come back here?
Yeah, do your hair, folks. You're on camera now.
Mostly just you. But yeah.
I'm perfect. No, you, that's all you.
I tip up our little. We're not live.
We're not live.
And this isn't live streaming at all.
It will be.
It will be.
It will be.
Okay.
Is your apron happy?
So far, so good.
Excuse me, everybody.
Feeling good.
I have a glare.
Okay, I'm ready when you are, boss. Lights, camera, action. Tell me when.
3, 2, 1. Oh, hello from Mississippi, says someone. Hello.
Right. So what I've done previously from the painting where we left off, I've just developed it a little bit further where it's pretty much all blocked in. So I've identified where my lightest values are, my darkest values are, my key shapes, some structural things that I've changed and invented. I put an orange there. Now that isn't in the still life setup. It sort of is, if you like, by the pattern that's represented on the fabric, but I just felt that was needed just to kind of carry on that lovely orange continuity there, so I've just put that in. What I've also done is I've taken the background, which was a brown, I sort of made it into a purple. What that's really doing is echoing and playing with the 3 secondary colours that are predominant in this painting. So you have the secondary colour orange, the green, both of the apple and this main pot. So purple sits in quite nicely. So of course with those 3 secondary colours, what you have is a triad, which is a harmony. You're taking 3 colours and putting them together. That's another colour harmony relationship. So that's working quite well. I've also taken some of that purple and echoed it a little bit throughout the painting as well. So I've kind of got this very kind of structural mass. I can see what the items are. My brain is filling in a lot of the gaps. I can see that these blocky shapes are trying to represent fruit. Even the cherries are just sort of situated by a few kind of simple blobs. What I want to do now is start adding just maybe a little bit of clarity and to give a greater sense of form. Remember, form makes things look 3-dimensional. It gives it the shape, the character and the personality of the fruit or the fabric or the pot or whatever it is that you are painting. Also, I'm going to start channeling a little bit more kind of Cezanne in his approach, and what he was very known for doing was offering something of a bit of a linear line around certain things to help it pronounce. Before we get into that, I want to show you how I would start giving a little bit more form to the painting. Now, the biggest noticeable difference that I'm going to swap is some smaller brushes. So I'm using size 2. These are Rosemary's brushes, size 2 Filbert Hog. So not particularly tiny, but certainly not the big brushes that I started with. So that's the only real difference. I have cleaned off my palette. So I've got a bit of a kind of a cleaner pool of paint area for me to work with the paint now. Now, where do you start first with the smaller brush work? Okay, I think the most important thing we should do when we start this is focus on the focal area, or those Hollywood stars, the main characters of our painting. So what I'm not going to spend a long time sort of doing with my small brushes is maybe this giant pot up here, or the bit of the table, or the background there. Those aren't particularly important areas. They are important to give it context, but not important because they are the things that I want people to look at. What I want people to really enjoy looking at is this pot here, of course the fruit that's taking place here and here. So those are the areas that I'm going to work on first. So let's just take a little step back and take my glasses off, and let's just let me just start. I'll start with a couple of fruit just to sort of help you show. Now, the application of the paint will be in the same vein that I did initially, which is very direct with the mark making. Okay, so I want every little brush stroke to be very sure of itself, but the difference is that I'm just working in a more smaller manner. Okay, so I'm just being a lot more careful in these brush strokes. The other thing that I will start to do, and again, taking inspiration from poor Cezanne, is the way that I lay these brush strokes on. So not only are they still small and direct, but I might start getting to a little bit of rhythmic painting, a little bit of rhythm in the brushwork. So what I would start doing is things like this, sort of these sort of little linear marks. And Cezanne did that. If you look at his paintings, you'll see that he was doing these sort of little these sort of little line marks. Now, you don't want to do them so much that they're just so obvious and then they stick out like a sore thumb. It's a sort of a pseudo way of blending your paint without blending, by putting on these little marks down. So I'm just going to darken that area just under that fruit there. So I'll show you again. I'm just going to do a little kind of smaller marks. So my aim is to try and make this apple just feel a little bit more three-dimensionally round, without blending, okay, without sort of rubbing it all together. The brush strokes I'm laying on are smaller. They can be a little bit thicker than the previous layered brush strokes. And I'm trying to describe the character of that particular apple. So somebody said earlier, what do you mean by the character? It hasn't got a personality or anything, but I think it sort of does, because it is the colour of the flesh, for example. Is it perfectly round, or has it got a slight bulbous quality to it? Does it stick out in a different direction? So I'm looking at the individuality and the characteristic of each fruit, because each one is slightly different. So I am keeping my eye out for every single one. So as I move down into this one here, I'm noticing that it's slightly more yellow at the base than the way that it moves around the form. Now, I'm not trying to cover up the previous layer's brush strokes. That's not what I'm doing. I'm not trying to cover all of them up. Most of what I've established is going to remain. Some of it will get painted over and structured and remodelled and maybe even completely changed. But some of it will remain until the end, until the final stage that I decide that the painting is finished. So don't see this as I have to now cover up every single bit of the picture. Some of it will, but some of it might remain. So lots more standing out. So you see just the difference, the form that this is having as opposed to there. It's minor, it's not a great leap, it's not a giant leap of difference, but it's about giving it that little sense. I'm going to add a couple of extra cherries that I've sort of put over here, so I'm going to go much darker. So if I want to create a real dark sort of line, if you like, I'm using my 3 darkest values on my palette. So I'm using ultramarine blue, my crimson, and maybe a bit of the viridian green, and that's giving me a really dark black without it actually being black, because we don't really want to use black if we can avoid it. So I'm just going to put that sort of darker line within there. And then I'm making up this cherry. I'm sort of stealing a pre-existing cherry shape on this side. So you have that over there. So just to sort of make a slight differentiation of what's going on over there. Let's put a slightly darker line down there. So that darker mark is just helping it sit. It's cementing it and placing it down. So it don't always make it black. So sometimes people see this as a great opportunity, they just put black everywhere. And you can sort of do that, but it can really flatten the image and it can make it look a little naive, a little childish, sometimes by putting a heavy black line, a little bit like sort of a colouring in book. So you have to be careful, reserve some of those darker lines for where the weight of the painting is needed, i.e. where you want it to sit down quite heavily. So I want these fruit to sit quite lower down, so inevitably where I want it lower, it's situated lower down onto the fruit, and as it moves down here a little bit darker into this area. So I want it to feel, this is where it starts to feel like it's been slightly nestled and taken over by the fabric. Now speaking of the fabric, I'm also going to work with that. I'm going to swap brushes. So I have one brush that's my warmer brush now, and I have another brush that's slightly cooler, and I'm now looking at this area of the fruit, and on the still life in front of me, I can see that this area here is that little bit darker as it just comes closer towards this apple. So I'm going to start putting in this sense of shadow. And the shadows are my cooler blues and cooler purples as I start putting that down here. I'm going to start bringing some of those lines, like that. And that's going to give me that feeling of the fabric. This would work particularly well for those of you that are painting, there's like a big willow wicker vessel and cane, so you can start using these lines to show the form and the direction of the print, the type of material and texture. Where am I going? Up here. Try and have the lines that you put down follow the shape and the form of the fabric. Let's go a bit more green. So using a little of the Viridian green, the cooler green. You don't want to put them everywhere. The temptation is to put those little squiggles everywhere. So I'm only putting them where I can see in the fabric that it goes dark because it's hitting a shadow. Notice how I'm still holding my brush. Okay, I'm holding my brush where a brush is designed to be held. I'm not like this. Okay, I'm not holding the metal bit or up close. I'm stood back and I'm holding the end of the brush because this is how paintings are designed to be seen. They're designed to be seen far away. We don't look at paintings with our noses pressed right up close. We occasionally go in for a little bit of a look from rare time to time, but on the whole, paintings are designed to be seen stood well back. Now, if I grow out from this point, which means I'm just going to take small little steps moving out from this focal area, let's start looking at, just start bringing in some shape to the vase above it, this lovely little pot, which is great. Let's go green now, I don't want to go too blue. Let's wipe off that excess, bring a hint more ochre into the dark green. That's better. So using ochre and a bit of Viridian green, a bit of white, a bit of the cooler blue. There we go, that was the colour I was aiming for. I'm going to go a little bit darker behind that pot, just so it has a slight differentiation. Remember, we haven't got black or brown. We're trying to use pure colour to describe. See that dark mark? It's just separating them together. I'm going to bring some of that darkness on this side now. I'm going to go a touch darker. And it's where the clarity starts to come together. And sometimes the paintings, when they get into that finished blocking stage, we start to crave, but I want it to look a little more tighter, more controlled, to have a sense of it feeling like it's sitting soundly within the area, and that's what this stage is. Like that. Let's just take a little bit of light. I'm going to take another brush, and I'm going to just look at some of those cherries and offer a hint of form, because at the moment they're sort of pretty blobby, although they still look and read quite convincingly as little round cherries because of the colour note of them. I'm not doing this with any primer and any warm red, I'm just using the cool alizarin crimson red. Like that. And again, I've just made those up, they're not even in the still life, I've just completely made those up. I've sort of taken cherries that I can see, but put them elsewhere within the picture. I'm going to go slightly darker at their base, so where they touch the fabric, because I don't want them to feel like they're floating, so just a wee bit darker in the area around them, a little bit of line, like that. So you can still see my mark, you can still see how individualised it is. Let's just tidy that area up a little bit now. Whoops, a little bit too cool. Let's just knock that back. That's perfect. A little grubby. I need to get some more paint on my brush in a moment. Paint on my palette, sorry, and I'll do a couple more marks, and then I'm going to let you carry on. I just start to feel like I want a little bit of something moving up here now. So you notice I'm sort of growing out from this zone, this middle area, my sort of one of my main important focal areas to the painting. As we transition up and go slightly orange, slightly greener. I don't want to do those zigzag lines everywhere. It's nicer to have areas that are slightly calmer. You want as much, a good variety of mark making. So some of the areas will be left quite flat and quite, some with not much mark making, and others will have a lot more mark making just to help that variation. Give us a hint of some of the highlights just on a couple of those apples. So it's slightly cooler in colour, like that. And you just keep going and going and going. If there was a print or a pattern, which there is, and if I was to put it in, I would start to sort of tease it in now in places, and I'd start to paint wet into wet to showcase that. And some of you, when you have that beautiful porcelain pot at the very end, which some of you are painting, it's at this stage where I'd start to sort of hint at the character. So I'll show you, I'll kind of invent one just to sort of show you. So it's a very cool cobalt blue. So if there was this pattern on this, I'd start to just very gently start to paint wet into wet to describe the formation of the pattern into it. So you want to keep it quite light, and it sort of melts in a little bit like that. So you're just hinting at a sort of a patternation going round. Okay, so that's how I would approach that. The same if you had that wicker willow casket little thing, that I would do a similar sort of thing. I would just do a series of cross-hatching lines, sort of like I've done in the fabric, and that will give the illusion of it being the willow and the shape and the form we're trying to get. And I think, in sort of summary, you don't need to do as much of this as you think. Okay, the thought is you have to kind of go into lots and lots of detail. Now, the difference between there and there is actually quite nominal, really. I haven't really done a great deal. The finished synthetic looks a lot more sophisticated compared to this, which is quite blocky. But actually, in what I've done, there's still a good 50% of these blocking brushstrokes are still visible. All I've done is just change the form a little bit, strengthen some of the darks, strengthen some of the lights, a little additional colour. So it makes it a little bit more convincing as a three-dimensional object, as opposed to being, quite broad, quite blocky, quite structural. And just to finish, there's nothing wrong in that. Some people like that aesthetic, and there are great artists all over the world that paint in this very, very kind of broad way. And this way of painting, the Cezanne, really inspired the likes of, say, Matisse and Picasso, who famously called Cezanne the father of us all in the way that he painted in a very broad manner. This is a perfectly nice way, but you can kind of find that nice sweet spot where there's just a little bit more form work with slightly smaller brushes, just to give it that little bit more focus. And the luxurious thing for us as painters is you don't need to do it all over the whole painting. Again, if you look at some of Cezanne's pieces, you'll notice the most amount of work goes in on the key areas he wants you to look at. So areas like this broad place in the sky, I mean, I might just leave that like that. Why not? It's nice, big and much more bold. That's going to contrast some of the smaller, more controlled brushwork there. Okay, I'll know that more as I develop that painting a little bit further. But you have permission not to do everything. You have permission and advice to focus on just your key areas with the smaller brushes and bringing it together. But I would only look at doing that once you've finished blocking everything in and everything feels okay in terms of the strength of value and colour and the design, which most of you have done incredibly well so far. Are there any questions before we carry on? Just as a reminder, you don't have to finish this by the end of the day, of course. You can photograph the still life, and this is something that we can continue carrying on at the end of the week, okay? So it's not all get it finished now. If you just spend the rest of the day blocking in, that's perfectly fine. If you start modelling some of the small ones, that's fine. Still try as hard to work from life, because all the answers are there in front of you in life. You don't need to anchor that photograph. You'll have the luxury of photography a little bit further down the line. You had a question?
So the detailed stuff, would that be for the star of the show, kind of the two focal areas, or whatever you've decided?
That's right, yeah. So for me, I'm kind of working on this area, working up to the pot, and I'll kind of work over to this area as well. But am I going to paint every single 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 2, 4, 6, 7? Am I going to paint all 7 of those apples in really crisp detail? Why not?
Because you want to focus on the front and the side ones,
Yeah.
and the side ones along the edge of the pot
Yeah.
want to be fuzzy.
Great. So if I make these two really, really detailed, it's sort of pulling your eye and attention away. Whereas if I kind of make this one, which of course he's pointing inwards, if I make this cluster of 3, that little bit more stronger, they of course they are closer to us, compared to those that are slightly set back, again, that's going to enhance that sense of illusion. So again, you have permission, even though you're working on that area which there's a lot of work to be done, you don't have to do much work on the ones that are not as important. So just think about, really clever, why are you putting detail in areas? Wherever you're doing the detail work, what you're telling my eye, you're telling the viewer's eye, look at this is really important. And if it is really important, great, but I'll always question, is it as important as you think? Or can you leave some out, which then gives the others more focus, more depth, more interest, and more variety? So if your painting's got lovely soft areas, soft edges, broader brush strokes, that's then going to complement and be the opposite to the areas that are much more controlled with the smaller brushes. If you're going to do one thing, counterbalance it with the other. Okay? If you're going to have an area that's quite busy, have an area that's quite absent of busyness. And that'll just balance the whole picture a lot better. Any other final questions? Right.
I'm a bit bothered by the cloth on the right, because it looks like it's going up on a wave and I can't understand how it's supported.
What's really fascinating about it, if you look at Cezanne's, they have that, it sort of looks like a river of water sometimes. So what he used to do, he used to sort of just change it, he used to put things under the fabric. It's not necessarily a flat tablecloth, it was all sort of bunched up. When I move my smaller work up into this area, I'll stand back and ask myself that same question of what is going on in that area. Do I need to lose it? Do I need to bring it back? Do I need to add a certain amount of clarity? But because this area is, for me at the moment, not the main focal area, I'm just going to focus on this first. And as I grow into this area, I'll be asking myself these similar questions of what's it adding, or is it actually distracting and causing more confusion? We want to take as much confusion out of the painting as possible. Right, I look forward to seeing how these develop. Off you go. If you want to photograph this, please do.
Yes. I like the way you made the tabletop much lighter,
Yes.
and I think that works quite beautifully.
I
like the way the weight of the fruit is pulling the cloth in.
Yes, it pulls it down, doesn't it? Yeah, it's not just sort of floating on clouds
I
anymore.
was wondering how I was going to get that sort of impression.
Sorry.
And it's not, and don't be, it's not just the black line, it's the dark blues that are around it that are just giving it that weight and pulling it down.
Yes, yes.
Sorry, can I come out before you?
Sorry.
Oh goodness me, another burn in trouble.
Yeah, I saw that.
It's not burn, it's just the weather.
Where to next? Where to next?
Right, and then move mine out of the vase.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, right up.
Another question.
Can I just move my easel one moment, Philippa, and I will be with you in just a tick.